board meeting. I am Bryce Lundberg, our chair, our president. Dawn Cameron has had a foot injury and is unable to attend today, and so you're stuck with me. We've had a wonderful morning visiting KLM ranches to see Ken there and the farm and crops that he's producing, and then to Stone Lake, where we visited with, and I just got to mention Charlotte from the California Farmland Trust, who hosted us and focused on preservation of farmland, and then we moved over to the Stone Lake operation there and visited with Pat and Dee managing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife facility there, as well as Pat, who's running livestock on the property. And now we're here for our board meeting, and we have translation simultaneous in Spanish. If you would like that, you can maybe access that.
And I'd like to invite Claudia or Julia to provide instructions. Claudia or Julia?
Okay. And then we will then begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I was wondering, Mike Gallo, could I call on you?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Josh, would you take the roll?
Yes, sir. Rachel Arizmendi?
Present.
Dawn Cameron? Janae DaCosta?
Present.
Mike Gallo?
Here.
Eric Holst?
Here.
Linda Humiston?
Here.
Julia Jackson? Here. Bryce Lundberg?
Yes.
David Mancera? Here. Michelle Passero? Doria Robinson?
Here.
Frank Salazar? Here. Joyce Sterling? Patricia Stock? Chris Valadez? Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Josh. Well, we'll go ahead and get right into our meeting. We would like to take up the minutes from the June 7th meeting.
Recording in progress.
Frank? Is that a motion?
Yeah, motion to approve.
Thank you, Frank. We have a second? Thank you, Dr. Stock. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It passes. Thank you very much.
I was just going to abstain since I was absent.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't call for that, Rochelle. Thanks for that. We'll have one abstention. Then today we have Virginia. Yeah. Virginia, I don't have your last name.
Well, it's Jameson. So I'm Virginia Jameson. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Working Lands, and you're likewise stuck with me today because the Secretary's on vacation and the Undersecretary couldn't be here, so here we are.
It's our lucky day, Virginia. Thank you very much.
I'll do my best to give you what updates I'm aware of. And so some of the things I've been thinking about are programs that have application periods that are opening soon. So included in that is our Conservation Ag Planning Grants Program, and we're estimating late this month for those to come out. We also have a pollinator habitat program that's going to be releasing the final RFP later this month. And then we have some things that are in process right now, like our Farm to School Incubator Program, which opened in May and is going to be closing tomorrow. So get those applications in. And then we've also got our Beginning Farmer and Farm Worker Training Program that closes the first day of August. So look forward to those. Another big thing is that our budget came out today, and I have a giant spreadsheet of all the things that CDFA has received money for. And so just a few of the things that caught my eye are an additional $32 million and 16 positions for our Farm to School grant program, which is really great and is going to allow a big expansion of that program. We've got a drought resilience and response package that includes $110 million for SWEEP, which I believe is the most money we've ever had for that program. Massive amount of money there. And then on the smaller but still significant side, there are $5 million for organic transition. And then, let's see, $25 million for drought resilience, drought relief for small farmers. $15 million for the WETA program, the Water Efficiency Technical Assistance Program. And then back down to things that were promised in a prior year in 21-22 and have come through for 22-23. We've got $10 million for our healthy refrigeration program, $48 million for livestock methane reduction, another 15 for pollinator habitat program. We've got, $85 million for the healthy soils program. I think that's the most we've ever had there. And then, a whole series of other things that if folks are interested, I can send you additional information on. But yeah, it's great set of things for CDFA, and we're looking forward to working with everyone to roll out some great programs.
Virginia, would you take some questions if there are questions from the board?
I would try. Yes.
Questions for Virginia? Virginia, these funds for drought and for farmers that have particular needs is amazing, and just I'm really thankful for the administration's efforts to address these sort of needs, and look forward to seeing how these funds go out to across California.
You're very welcome. I promise you there's not a day that goes by that we're not talking about the drought constantly and focusing a lot of energy on it. So we're happy to see this come through.
Great.
Mr. Chair, just another quick question. Given that the farm to school applications or proposals are due tomorrow, is there intent to ensure that the dollars are in for the upcoming school year?
Yeah, so we'll have another solicitation because we've got new money. And I don't know the mechanics of the program well enough to address that, but we can follow up with you.
While you're taking questions on a topic that you didn't mention, but I know that climate affairs are on your portfolio, and my organization submitted comments last week to ARB on the scoping plan. So I was just curious kind of what's on your plate regarding sort of the implementation of the scoping plan once it's finalized.
Yeah, so if CARB chooses to go with their alternative 3, which I think was the staff recommended proposal, then that would include, as was mentioned earlier today, 6,000 acres of cropland protection that we'd be coordinating very closely with Department of Conservation to do. There was 50,000 acres of healthy soils practices in there, and then there was also a 20% by 2045 increase for organic agriculture. And so those are kind of the things that are on the cropland side. And then there are also efforts towards methane reduction, and that'll be something we participate in both through our dairy digester program and also our alternative manure management program. And then, we have work to do with FDA on enteric fermentation emissions reductions. It's probably going to take us a little bit longer, but we're working on that as well.
Okay.
Is the methane reduction program, is that through cow feed?
So we have two grant programs that we operate out of our Office of Environmental Farming, and those are the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program, and then our Alternative Manure Management Program.
Is that all the questions? And thank you so much for the update, Virginia. That was wonderful.
Yeah, sure. It's fun to be here with
And
you all.
thanks for handling so many questions.
Yeah,
Nicely
sure.
done.
Sure thing.
The next item that we have is a presentation on drought update and drinking water by Kara Heckert.
Oh, no, sorry, that's,
Is that, am I on the wrong one there?
you're right. No.
Oh,
Farmland
okay.
Lost.
Very good. On
conservation,
farmland lost. Thank you. And if you want to cover the drought, bang, you're on it as well. Okay. We'll open that up to you.
Yes, I'm just waiting to get this up for you real quick.
I just wanted to thank Josh for his patience with my technical difficulties. He was supposed to get a couple days ago, and I was supposed to bring printouts, and neither of those things, my presentation didn't come through. So, do they have the handout? That would be great if we want to pass that down.
This is it.
Yeah,
It stopped right here, Kara. I was just not on top of it, so it's moving its
It's
way.
okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not being able to spotlight that for some reason. We're working on it, Karen.
That was a great field trip, wasn't it, Kara?
yes.
Had you been to KLM before?
I haven't, and it's actually a great kind of cue up to what I'm going to talk about because you saw it live.
We did.
You know, a farm kind of on the edge of a community that's being developed rapidly without a lot of oversight. So I'm going to go ahead and start. My name is Kara Heckert. I'm the Resilient Agriculture West Advisor for American Farmland Trust. That's a new position created at American Farmland Trust just about 4 months ago. Prior to that, I was the California Regional Director, and there's a couple familiar faces in here. Glenda and I go way back, same with Virginia and I. So I'm just really happy to be here and talk to you about our newest national research report called Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. And full disclosure, I am not the lead researcher or even really like key person on this report, but I am the key person for California to talk about our findings and our national findings. And what's also exciting for you all is that this just came out last week. You are getting actually the first presentation in California about this report. So if there are questions I can't answer, I will be sure to follow up later with you. So just a bit about American Farmland Trust if you don't already know about us. We are a national agricultural land trust. We've been around for 40 plus years. Our mission is to protect farmland, promote environmentally sound farming practices, and support the next generation of farmers. And we work from kitchen table to Congress, as we say. So we work with landowners on on-the-ground projects. We do extensive research, like the project I'm going to talk to you about today. And we work in state capitals and in Washington, D.C. on policy. So we really work the gamut of things. I always say, I worked at a conservation district before I came to American Farmland Trust, and I always say I thought I knew a thing or two about farming. And then I came to work at AFT and realized how incredibly complicated and dynamic it is, especially in a state like California. So if you could move on to the next slide. So just a quick thank you for the production of Farms Under Threat was not possible without the Natural Resources Conservation Service, huge partner of all of ours, also our technical partner, Conservation Science Partners, and University of Wisconsin-Madison. Next slide, please. So this is a common scenario we all see. So this is probably a property, maybe not even in California. Chances are maybe not, but you've seen something like this before. Probably a family that has been there for multiple generations, has been running the farm and ranch for many years, and then for whatever reason, whether it means for economics or lack of a successor or just not being able to make it work, you see the sign pop up. And this is happening all over America, and is probably no surprise to any of you. Next slide. So, oh, and I was going to add to that, something that you may all not know is that 40% of farmers are retiring in the next 2 decades. A little tidbit for those of you who don't know about California specifically is that the average age of our farmers here are 59 years old. So AFT has conducted the most comprehensive study of changes in agricultural land use in the United States. And what we found is that from 2001 to 2016, over 11 million acres were converted, or 2,000 acres per day. So we've lost how many already per day? About 1,000. This is not new news. Our report that came out 2 years ago, which was called Farms Under Threat, State of the States, looked at that, and this new report is taking a look forward at farmland and projecting 3 potential scenarios. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick, I'm going to go to the next one now. So our first scenario of development threat to farmland is business as usual. Converting land at the current pace will have us losing an area the size of South Carolina by 2040. 6 states will convert 10% of their farmland, and over 20 counties, many of them in the West, will convert over 40% of their remaining farmland. So that's just in the next 18 years to give you an idea. But here's the most concerning part about it. Over half of this conversion is projected to happen on our most productive, versatile, and resilient land, or what we call land of national significance. So in business as usual, how we describe it is historical trends will continue, low density sprawl will proliferate, and farms will be rapidly lost and fragmented. Next slide, please. So what does that mean in acres? 18.4 more million acres will be lost by 2040. And these acres aren't just being lost in the urban areas, like you're losing a lot around cities like Sacramento, Phoenix, Nashville. It's happening a lot in rural towns, which will be most affected, where small farmers are going out of business. Now I want to talk to you about the second scenario. Not trying to completely depress people, but let's talk a minute about runaway sprawl. New development is very inefficient, so that's going even further away from business as usual. Low density sprawl dominates the landscape and few farms remain in near cities. So next slide. How much will we lose there? 24.4 million acres. And the last scenario I want to talk to you about, next slide, please. I know this is a rapid slide. Next slide, is what we call better built cities. And this is what AFT and many of our partners promote, and what we need folks like you to get on board with us about, which we believe you probably already are, but that's what I'm here today to hope for. In this scenario, communities choose efficient growth. New development is dense and more livable. There's many more farms. And with this, next slide please, compact growth can spare 13.5 million acres lost. Now I'm going to bounce back a little bit. That's kind of the national picture. And now I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening in California. And now we can refer to our handouts here because it's fairly complex information. And I didn't put it all on the slide, but that 2-page summary, you are the first external audience to get it. It's not even on our website yet. But some things I wanted to highlight are probably no surprise to all of you, but where the three of the top 20 counties nationally in farmland acreage loss are in California. They always have been. They probably always will be. Everyone wants to live in California, right, for the most part. So it's probably no surprise to many of you that they're in Southern California in the San Joaquin Valley. So Riverside, San Bernardino, and Fresno County. Really sobering is, and you hear a lot about Riverside County, but Riverside County now loses farmland faster than anywhere in California and second fastest in the entire nation to lose farmland. And Riverside used to, I would still consider it to have pretty robust ag economy, but compared to what it was, it's lost a lot. Same with San Bernardino County, it's the second fastest in the state and 12th fastest in the nation. And Fresno County is the 3rd fastest to lose farmland in the state and the 17th fastest in the nation. However, this county's farmland loss may impact the nation's food supply the most. And you could probably guess, maybe I shouldn't see a raise of hands. Well, let's just say that it's the most diverse and productive farmland in the world. And many of you know that about the entirety of the San Joaquin Valley. And many of the other San Joaquin counties are not too much further down the list. You have Tulare and Kern and San Joaquin that are not too much further behind, but wanted to highlight these. A couple more things that I just wanted to pull out from the summary, I didn't put it all on the slide, is that we project 794,400 acres will be lost, 6,000 farms, and $1 billion in farm output and 13,000 jobs. Again, I think the most concerning thing of all is that 67% of the conversion is on California's best land. So we know we're going to lose some farmland. It's not realistic to say we aren't going to lose some. It's not realistic to say we don't need new housing and new communities, and we certainly aren't advocating for not having new housing. It's that we're losing the very best land for agriculture in the world at a rapid pace. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about solutions because I think they're possible and there's innovations happening. And I'm here to kind of help you understand some of the policy solutions that might exist, but I'm definitely not going into all of them today. So just know that there are many more things we can do, and I'm hoping we'll have a little time to discuss. Next slide. So first and foremost, which is probably pretty obvious, is to encourage smart growth. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Here's just a few suggestions. Provide continuous and expanded funding for local governments to plan for agriculture and mitigate for its loss. So we have a great funding source in California Department of Conservation's Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program. And AFT is a huge champion of that program. And I think the department has done an excellent job. Virginia was there as part of this to really accelerate the work with local communities to plan for agriculture. We all know how difficult that kind of work is. These decisions are local and they're political and they take constant, continuous effort. So that funding source is so critical to this kind of work, and there's so much need. We get calls every day wanting people to have AFT, maybe not every day, every week, wanting AFT to engage on that. Ensure stability at the urban edge. So we want to avoid development of the best farmland. And I think a really obviously critical component to this in California, something that we're working on in the San Joaquin Valley, is it's critical that we not silo our land use decisions with our water resources. So looking at the intersection of future water supply reliability and the land use at the same time. You might just assume that that's happening everywhere, but it actually isn't. There's some places where it is, but there's still being planning decisions and development decisions being made in a vacuum without looking at the water resources or the groundwater situation. We need to integrate that and protect our most important farmland, which is also our critical groundwater recharge zones in a lot of cases. Next slide. Protect farmland and advance farm-focused policy. So obviously this could be a whole presentation in itself, but just a couple of things. Continuous support and appropriations for the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, which not only supports local planning for agriculture, like I just mentioned, but even more critically, purchase of agricultural conservation easements like you heard about this morning. We would also like to see California's Farmland Conservancy Program, which is an older program that does not have, really has no budget and no funding, continues to not have any budget or funding. We'd like to see that get reinstated. That also funds conservation easement projects. The multi-benefit land repurposing program that you heard about this morning. This is just starting. We don't know what the projects are going to look like, but it looks like a really innovative approach to keep farmers in farming and look at a lot of diverse ways to keep agriculture in place. And then we can talk about the Farm Bill, which I won't get into today. AFT obviously is a real leader in Farm Bill policy, and we are meeting with your staff soon to discuss our priorities from an educational point of view. And so funding programs like the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and other programs that support agriculture and delivering them in an effective and efficient way on the ground to farmers is something that needs to continue to happen. Next slide. I told Taylor earlier that I was going to keep this one very brief, and that is because I believe there's a lot of complexity to how we pursue solar siting. And in general, AFT is supportive of what we call smart solar siting. We have programs throughout the nation, but we understand the trade-offs to this and that some of the innovations that may need to happen in looking at new crop types, drought-tolerant crops, and not necessarily replacing agriculture with solar. How can we have multiple beneficial dual-use projects that support economics and keep land and farming? And then the last one I want to talk about, I'll wrap it up here soon so we have time for questions, is support and equitable farmland access. So many of you may or may not know that the number one limiting factor for farmers to get into farming in California is access to land. So we have a whole new generation of farmers. There's not a lack of enthusiasm out there. That's what gives me optimism. If I was giving you all this doom and gloom and I didn't think anyone wanted to be in farming anymore, that would be, we would be up an even steeper hill. There's a lot of people that want to get into farming. They have no way to access land. We need to have more robust state-funded programs like farm linking programs, a farm link program where you link a land seeker with a land seller. Lots of times we have retiring farmers that don't know that there is another option besides selling their land to a developer because they don't have an offspring that wants to take on the farm, and they don't know that there's a farmer looking for their farmland. So we need to provide a bridge and connection between land seekers and landowners. We need to support efforts to increase access and funding to new beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers through projects. And one example of this would be AFT is a big proponent of Buy, Protect, Sell. Buy, Protect, Sell is exactly what it sounds like. An organization like AFT buys a farm that needs to be sold, protect it in perpetuity with an agricultural conservation easement, and if it can pencil out, we can sell it for a reduced cost to a new and beginning farmer. We need to scale up programs like that. Otherwise, we're going to keep on losing farmland the way we are. One more slide, or a couple more. Just wanted to talk real briefly about how AFT is responding besides the recommendations I just made. So AFT has a national agricultural land network. That's for planners, anyone working on farmland preservation. We have over 670 members of our National Agricultural Land Network where we share resources about not as much policy related, more technical resources around farmland protection. If you know anyone interested, I'm happy to share more information. Accelerating policy work, strengthening land transfer efforts like Buy, Protect, Sell, advancing smart solar siting, and promoting farm viability, especially for urban edge and historically marginalized farmers. And I just want to close with a couple more resources for you. I'm happy to also give my contact information. This is what I mean by you being early on the information. We're not even doing the California webinar on this until July 27th, so you guys got me all ready to go early. But we also are doing 30-some other states, so if you're interested in the findings of another state, you can go to that link, farmland.org/NALM, and we have a number of webinars happening where we will have policy recommendations. It'll be a much deeper dive than what I was able to do today. And one more. If you're interested on the policy front, and maybe we can share this out, Josh, later, because this is kind of a lot. We do have our virtual Farm Bill policy platform release coming up at the end of July, because we do have a new Farm Bill coming up. And that'll be an interesting conversation. So with that, I will wrap it up and open it up to any questions. Hopefully I can answer them or any comments.
Kara, great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and we're the first to see the presentation. It was wonderful. Questions or comments? Glenda.
Thanks, Kara. That was great. Just a couple things. I'm particularly taken about that trying to transfer farmland from those that have it to those that want it without the family connection. I mean, this is something FarmLink nationally does a lot of work in. So, two questions. One is I'm just curious to if you've got any particular partnership activities going there. I know there are some, but I'm a little out of the loop by a few years. And then also, we've seen some interest here in like trying to do employee ownership, like ESOPs, such as Swanton Berry Farm has done, where they're slowly turning ownership of the farm over to employees. And I know Alba over on the Central Coast has been doing some work along those lines. Is that something American Farmland Trust has looked into, perhaps trying to spread further? Because I personally think that's a very fascinating option.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the FarmLink thing. So we have, I would call it a pretty close partnership with California FarmLink. We also coordinate the Hudson Valley FarmLink, which is in the state of New York, and it's one of the only state-funded it's actually in the state budget. And that's what we're aiming for in California, because California FarmLink is a tremendous organization, but they don't have baseline funding from the state. They can't cover the whole state, and there's so much potential. So we actually have creating a state-funded FarmLink program through Department of Conservation was in our budget ask this year. Did not happen. We'll be doing that again. We probably need to expand our support. And then, I don't know that AFT has been too involved in employee ownership, but I think AFT is the kind of organization that is so innovative and has so much capacity as far as we may not be able to do every deal, we don't have, we have limits there, but we have so much intellectual capacity on all the different things that we've tried over the years that it could definitely be something we'd be willing to explore. I could say that squishily on behalf of the organization.
I was just wondering, what are some of the largest contributing factors to the Irvine loss of farmland, if you don't mind?
Oof. Speaking to Irvine specifically is probably pretty similar to all of Southern California. Warehouse development is huge. That's what we're hearing over and over again. And then I would just say really rural, what we call low density, LDR, low density residential is actually what's pretty prolific all over California and the rest of the United States. So rural residential. So I think people think a lot of times that it's just urban sprawl. It's actually rural residential, like ranchette. So that and warehouses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Kara. I actually have two questions. The first is around support that AFT might have for preserving farmland for crops that are better suited to leasing. And then the second question is more as we look to some of the local policies. I'm on the Central Coast in the Pajaro Valley, and there's sort of a divide between conservation, farming, and housing, and sort of how do we rectify the need for affordable housing, natural conservancy, and then also the preservation of historical agricultural land?
These are tough questions. Kind of expand on the first one, because I'll go with that one first. So, because that is not something, and I don't want to ping Tom, but I don't think that's something that we've really explored. But maybe you could expand on what you meant by that one.
Sure. So I'm in the Pajaro Valley on the Central Coast, and so we've got berries, apples, leafy greens, potatoes. And so a lot of those, you're seeing a lot of crop rotation just because of the nature of the crops. You can't stay on them for multiple years at a time. And so even growers of means who might be able to afford to buy land, it's not in their interest to buy land because they're going to need to move off to be able to have, to maintain the crops. So it's a very much a leasing. You lease your land for 3 to 5 years, you move to another, you might enter into a multi-crop lease arrangement, between berries and leafy greens. And so as we start to think through landowners who do not have an economic incentive, are there ways that we can sort of start to think of how we might provide economic incentive to those landowners to keep that agricultural land in production?
I wonder, and I'm just totally just kind of brainstorming with you here because I don't know that AFT, at least in California, has done much in that arena. But I do wonder with the multi-benefit land repurposing program if there's an element of exploration into that. That's probably the best answer I can give you, but I definitely can get back to you. And then I think that your second question is a challenge of the ages, right, for the state of California. How do we balance affordable housing, drought conditions, protecting our most important farmland? I do think kind of going back to a couple different things that many of us know need to happen is, again, what we're doing in the San Joaquin Valley, we've been working with Conservation Biology Institute for many years, using a spatial analysis tool called Data Basin, and it looks at the intersection, it looks at a lot of different data layers, but it looks at the intersection of our farmland and our water resources. So I don't know where I'm going with my answer, but I think what I'm saying is how you get to some of that, solving some of those problems, is having innovative tools like that local planners can use. It's very user-friendly. And I can't remember the other thing I was going to answer on that. Oh, really putting a value on what agriculture provides, just like what Glenda was saying or Michael was saying this morning. We don't have enough data looking at valuing our ecosystem services. I mean, there was work done in Sonoma County and Santa Clara and Santa Cruz where they looked at the value of ecosystem services the agricultural land provided. They used those monetary values and put them on ballot measures to re-up organizations like the Sonoma County Ag Preservation and Open Space District. I think if you don't monetize the ecosystem services that agricultural land provides, it's very hard for the general public to get behind more investment. So those are just some suggestions. I don't really know if it answered your question or not.
I know, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I add some things? Even
Yes,
though I'm an
please do.
interloper in your group today. This is one of my favorite topics. So I would argue that a conservation easement does provide a financial incentive. The state has funds where it can pay a land trust to acquire those easements from the owner. And so that's a way for the owner to extract value from their asset and be able to use it to, pay out their heirs if that's what they want to do, or invest it back in their business. But it's only going to be a percentage of the full development value of that property. And so that's, to me, where all the other items that we need to have in place around good land use policy come into play, because you need that owner to have some sort of assurance that having their land in agriculture is going to be the best and highest and best use of that land going forward, that it's going to be a sustainable, reliable investment for them to continue to lease out their land for agriculture. And so they need to know that development is not going to be springing up around them. Mm-hmm. They're going to have the water, like fingers crossed, the climate is going to be conducive to this. So that's why we've tried so hard in the state to put out grants for planning and try to get local governments to look at the whole picture. Like, where are you going to put your housing? We absolutely need to house people. We have a massive shortage. But where can we do that and do it at a density that makes sense? That's, a much higher density than what Kara was presenting about the low density residential development. In some places in this state, we are developing land at we're using it to accommodate 6 people per acre. And to me, that is just not an efficient use of land. Yeah. Compared to, some other places that they're not like Soviet housing blocks. They are, reasonable single family neighborhoods where you can accommodate more like 30 people per acre. Yeah. And so that's the kind of development we need to be doing. And so it's all about stabilizing the urban edge. I think you mentioned that, making sure that local government plans are going to be protective of agriculture into the future. Mm-hmm. And then I can't remember your second question, but I feel like I had something to say about that too. Would you remind me?
Sure. My second question was more around the conservation, farming, and housing.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think you actually answered.
Okay, yeah, I bled into that one too. Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you. I have a comment about a topic that came up on the field trip, and maybe you have some thoughts on it. It's related to 30 by 30 and the sort of lack of resolution yet on how to treat ag land in that initiative. And so my thought is that I come from the environmental community and sort of a conservation biology training, and I think definitely there is a sense that there's sort of, you're in conservation land or you're not. It's sort of a binary thing. And, I feel like the landscape that we visited today showed that it's not binary, that you have, kind of a spectrum of conservation value in ag lands. And so, for example, when we're driving along the levee there and you had the Cosumnes River riparian area on one side and you had, crops on the other side, I would argue that it was more valuable to have those crops adjacent to the riparian than to have, a shopping center, right? And so where I'm headed with this is, and we've done some work on this at EDF, but there's a need for some sort of advances in the field of conservation to acknowledge those sort of more beneficial neighboring land uses and to give credit for those. So you may not give full credit. And from a pure biodiversity perspective, it might be nice to have sort of a, native habitat adjacent to the riparian corridor. But agriculture, well-managed agriculture, is superior than to other land uses. So I just am curious. Sort of, I'm sure AFT is working on these issues both at the national level and within California, and I'm wondering if that idea is sort of compatible with how you think of it, and I guess more importantly, how this board could potentially play a role in advocating to this administration and to the federal government to kind of develop tools that would allow those acknowledgments to be made.
Yeah, I'll let. One thing I would mention when we made a comment about 30 by 30 is that I think that farmland protection is still not seen as a climate solution. And that's kind of the basic, I think, talking point. We did research called Greener Fields. We coined it Greener Fields, and UC Davis did research before us that shows that a farmland acre emits 58 to 70 times less greenhouse gas emissions than an urban acre. That research was really informative in helping create the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program as a climate investment program. That seems pretty like a straightforward, that protecting farmland is a climate solution. So it did seem right aligned with where 30 by 30 is. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Virginia, or the nuance, sorry to put you on the spot, but I thought you might, or the nuance of what's happening in 30 by 30 with farmland protection.
And it's a really good question because I think a lot of these things are compatible and very important. I think 30 by 30, the way the state document is written, it's willing to include in the full acreage count that we're aiming for the state. I can't remember what the acreage target was. Farmland can count towards that goal if there are durable biodiversity protections in the conservation tool, if that's an easement or a fee purchased property. I think there was a lot of concern today that farmland is not automatically included in the document just because it's protected. And I think that speaks to the state's focus on biodiversity through that document also. But I think you're right. I mean, just having farmland by a riparian corridor instead of housing is a huge step. And I think in the accounting that will go towards 30 by 30, the state will also be looking at like, okay, what are the less durable tools that we have? Maybe that's Williamson Act and other things, but they may not be counted towards that, acreage total that we're aiming for.
But that kind of raises the question of how do we define biodiversity-friendly farming? Because, we've got a lot of farmers in the state who are farming with wildlife. Does that qualify? I mean, how formal does that definition and the accounting of it need to be?
Yeah, I think it needs to be documented somewhere that it's part of the conservation values of the property, that it's something that's going to be protected, through your easement deed.
Yeah, but
And-
there's not enough money out there to throw easements on all the
Totally.
land that's farming with wildlife.
No.
And yet we could get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres farming with wildlife. So I think there has to be some option short of an easement. An
Agreed.
easement costs money.
Yeah. Oh, very expensive. Yes.
Getting farmers
Farm
willing to sign up for
conservation plan.
farming with wildlife does not necessarily have to cost money.
Well, Mr. Lumberg, you're the interim president. I think that this is a topic, and maybe Josh, we could talk about this at some other point, because we could exhaust the rest of our time here talking about it. But
That is a good point, Eric.
I'll just say that I think that there's that an idea that the state should consider would be to, again, rather than count an acre in or out of the 30 by 30 goal, maybe have a category which is sort of a discounted acre. So an acre that, let's say a 50-acre field that's adjacent to habitat could be counted as 25 acres, or 10 acres based on the contribution to the total state goal. And in that way, because I think there's another question about what's durable. Like, is an easement truly durable? There's things that can happen on an easement that might, cause biodiversity to be less well served. So anyway, again, this is a deeper conversation, but it just, to me, it speaks to the need in a kind of, we're in a very human dominated landscape here in California. We have to recognize that if, whatever biodiversity we're going to support is going to be supported in the context of 50 million people or however many people we have in the state. And so that finding, strategies like what AFT I think is promoting to keep, open space open and to maintain compatible, land uses is really important. And there needs to be a way to acknowledge that as opposed to sort of treating it as in or out.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that my colleagues at the Natural Resource Agency did make very clear is that they intend this to be an ongoing conversation and that the document was a starting place. So I think it's a great idea to bring this up again as part of a deeper discussion. I'm sure they would be willing to come over and make a presentation if asked, and we should keep talking about it. I did just want to touch on one thing that Kara said, which is that farmland preservation hasn't been looked at as a climate strategy, and we desperately need to look at it as a climate strategy. Mm-hmm. Something that was raised at that Air Resources Board meeting last week was that, despite how good we were all feeling about reducing our driving during the pandemic, vehicle miles traveled actually went up. Mm-hmm. And we cannot continue that trajectory if we're going to change the course of climate change. And to do that, we need to preserve farmland and do less sprawl development.
Kara, this has been a great discussion. Please, Julia.
Just quickly, I absolutely agree with you, Virginia, especially with the fact we're releasing 36 billion tons of CO2 every year into the atmosphere, and that's creating feedback loops. And so we desperately need our farmland to be a carbon sink. And if scaled globally, regenerative ag could be a massive solution to climate change to sequester that carbon. My question for you is, given the amount of fallow land that is happening worldwide, I think when I read in 2016, we were at 1.1 billion acres globally. I don't know what the acreage is in California, but is there any consideration? I know that to make that land usable for farmland again, there has to be like bioremediation to soak up some of the pesticides that, or whatever caused the land to be fallow in the first place. Maybe it's drought, but is there any consideration around repurposing that fallow land and turning it into a carbon sink? And if not turning that into a carbon sink, potentially like exploring revitalizing it, regenerating the soil in some way?
I mean, most of the land that I know about being fallowed or projected to be fallowed is from drought and potential impacts from the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and greater regulation. So the program that was mentioned earlier today, multi-benefit land repurposing, is, I think, a great one to keep an eye on again, because I think the intent there is, even if we have to fallow for a few years and maybe even change the crop type or bring in other economic means for the farmer, is that we're still trying to keep that most of that footprint in agriculture. So I think that is happening. It's a new program. The administration definitely seems to support it. So I think that we'll see where it goes, but that would be my best example of that. And yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, I think when you work in an organization like American Farmland Trust, maybe people think that you're going to say that we have to protect every acre, and we can. It's simply not going to be possible. So we are going to lose some land. We're going to lose more land in the valley than other parts of the state. And we really need to take a look again at what's the most productive, versatile, and resilient land, so we're not losing the very best stuff.
Thank you so much. What a great presentation and what a robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have an opportunity for public comment or public questions.
Yes, if you'd like to make public comment on this agenda item, please use your hand function. I will unmute your line. Seeing no public comment at this time online.
You know, I did a really poor job introducing you, Kara. I really had a wonderful bio here, and you really just kind of shared, all your expertise. But I would just mention that you are the Resilient Agricultural West Advisor for American Farmland Trust, and that's a new position you indicated. In this position, Kara leads the strategy and development of programs that provide greater opportunities for farmers and ranchers to engage in sustainable environmental stewardship practices through water conservation, nutrient management, and ecosystem services. Before joining AFT, she was the executive director of the Sonoma Resource Conservation District, where she worked with a diverse cross-section of the community on landscape-scale conservation planning, agricultural sustainability, and education. Kara is also a former soil conservationist for NRCS. I'm sorry I didn't mention all those things ahead of time.
Quite all right.
And I would just say, we can do this. Encourage smart growth, protect farmland and advance farm-focused policy, pursue smart solar siting, support equitable farmland access, and let people know that farmland is a climate strategy. Thank you so much, Kara.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
I think we have public comment from Taylor.
Oh, thank you, please.
Hi again, Taylor Ocean with the California Farm Bureau. Thank you so much for dedicating your time today to take this. I know it was a warm tour this morning. I absolutely concur with the recommendations in terms of policy recommendations from AFTF, and I'd like to offer maybe a few more more additional points as a part of her recommendations. The first, absolutely, we need funding for programs like SALC, CFCP, Williamson Act, and that funding needs to be done consistently. Every fund source that I just listed is at risk because it's not consistent. CFCP is bond dependent in terms of financing. SALC is dependent upon the financial wherewithal of the scoping plan of cap and trade and the interest in the council to continue to fund it. Williamson Act is not funded at all by the state, and we heard this morning about the need for that level of investment. I also would encourage the state to look at, and you all as communicators to the state, in looking at what are underserved communities? What are our smaller scale farmers and ranchers? What are our smaller plots? What are our socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers and new and beginning farmers and ranchers looking? How do we make sure that they find value in ag land preservation before they even get into the farm field? So I'd encourage the board and the department to consider options for that. I think we talked immensely about the need for identifying the preservation values of protection, biodiversity, habitat, general farmland opportunity, climate change impacts, but we also need to articulate the consequences for us not doing that. So we also need to be talking about greater consolidation of farms across California and the loss of opportunity for small to mid-scale farms, land inaffordability for new and beginning farmers and ranchers, socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, lost carbon sinks, absolutely, and more ag-urban conflict. We don't want to get into a situation where we have a question about this is a public health impact versus my right to farm. And I think the closer these areas come, the more often we have more frequent and debated discussions about that we don't need to if we had strong ag land preservation policies. Other things, absolutely an investment in farm linking programs. Workforce development, I think, is going to be a huge component of that. Business and financing education for those farm managers and those farm employees that are interested in taking over when children aren't able to take over for their parents. But also, it's about a long-term investment in ag education and ag literacy and teaching people what it means to be in agriculture and how important it is for you to be a champion for agriculture. It starts really at the K through 12 level. Finally, obviously, stabilizing ag markets for their impacts to growers, regulatory relief, business assistance, groundwater sustainability impacts, and what that means for farms. And then I'll just make a recommendation here. I think we talk about 30 by 30, and the problem is ag doesn't have demonstrable, durable biodiversity benefits that are articulated unless they're in an easement. We talk about climate change and talk about how, well, maybe avoiding vehicle miles traveled or avoiding increased greenhouse gases doesn't necessarily fit into our we need to reduce GHGs immediately. And we keep trying to stick ag where it doesn't fit best. And I would encourage the board and the state to consider setting a target for ag land preservation at its base value. I think that fully articulates that we believe that ag land preservation has a full spectrum of benefits, whether you're doing a conservation management practice or you're not, there still is value. So I would encourage the board to consider that. Thank you.
Is that an element in our Vision 2020, Josh? I don't know that it is. I just said a good goal to have that as a goal. Thank you for referencing that.
We do actually have a comment online from Patty from Kern County. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very important discussion. What I am that should be considered to support not to convert farmland into urban is legislation that has already been passed into law, SB 375, the Sustainable Community Strategy Program. This has been passed since 2015 and should be used by all public agencies that are approving new urban projects. This legislation requires that all urban services like water and sewer are provided by the municipality.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, I think that is those items. Josh, now we go into board discussion and recommendation.
Correct.
Did Don Cameron have any recommendations in this regard, Josh or Secretary Ross?
So definitely, thank you, Bryce. I know that there has been interest among board members for the potential to review kind of our committee makeup, and I think with the refresh of the number of new board members that we have to the board, that gives us that opportunity. I had the opportunity to discuss with President Cameron, and the thought was, from our standpoint, that there was the potential for 3 committees and open for discussion to add more. The first would be focusing on water to revitalize kind of the water committee that we did have to, again, focus on some of the key issues as Bryce and Mike and others of the water committee that are still here. Remember, there's a lot of movement in terms of the impacts of Sigma in the San Joaquin Valley and some of the water challenges that we have in the future, especially drought, to have that committee to help advise the board in some of the challenges that we'll be facing ahead. So there was the water committee. As we continue to move forward in developing the Ag Vision, we thought it would be good to have another committee to focus on Ag Vision to keep the board in check in terms of monitoring progress on that vision and what we need to do to implement it. So it would be broad task along some of the strategic priorities that you've seen in draft form while we wait for the Ag Vision to be finalized. And the third was, I know it was brought forward by some members as well, is to have a regenerative committee, and that committee would focus on the definition of regenerative agriculture. I think trying to work through a public process, working through various agencies to really have a good baseline of what regenerative means moving forward, and that's something that we've been within our draft discussions. Another area that's been brought up by Doria and some other members is the idea of maybe having a climate committee as well. So I'm happy to have discussion with the board members in terms of suggestions. Are we missing an area? What do we want the committees to achieve? The process would be is once we kind of finalize what we want in regards to committees, I will send out an email asking you which committees you would like to serve on. I think we would like a minimum of 5 members per committee, and then we will formalize those committees at the next board meeting by board action with the slate of participants.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, Dory and I have been talking about the climate committee, and I was just wondering what the guidelines and parameters around us as committee members meeting offline, or like,
So yes, so any committee that is constituted by the board is subject to bag leaking. So all meetings of the board would be posted. We could do teleconference meetings, but your
That's
office locations would be posted on that agenda, and we could do that via Zoom or via teleconference. But we would have to be, all meetings would need to comply with bag leaking.
okay, perfect.
One area, and I would value the board's input on this, I know that climate has definitely been an issue that the board would like a subcommittee on, and I would also welcome comments by our Deputy Secretary, Virginia Jameson. We do have a committee, the Environmental Science Advisory Committee, which really advises on the climate smart agricultural programs that we have in the department in detail in regards to some of the quantifications, the amount of technical assistance, the percentage of funding dedicated. So it's really kind of focused on that area. And so I don't know if climate warrants, in my mind, to be its own standalone committee or maybe combined with regenerative agriculture as a committee, but that's something for you as board members to discuss and provide comments on. Virginia, I don't know if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, like Josh said, the Environmental Farming Act Science Advisory Panel does look at specific programs and activities that CDFA is doing with regard to climate. I think it would be interesting to hear the board's thoughts on, broader policy recommendations, areas that you'd like, to see more work done on. But it would make sense to me to have some kind of collaboration with the Science Advisory Panel and not duplicate efforts or get out of alignment with each other, for sure.
And one additional committee that we've had in the past, and I would love for Bryce to comment on that, was more of kind of the food assistance panel, farm to family program, in which the board was really kind of dedicated to working with food banks to encourage farm donations to food banks. And so that's something, I don't know, Bryce, your thoughts in terms of having worked on that panel and worked on that effort, if it's more of a committee or more of a representative that kind of chairs that area of interest.
Yeah, I like that area, Josh. When I joined the board, Craig McNamara asked me to be a liaison to the food banks, and we had a vision goal of increasing contributions from 100 million pounds annually to 200 million pounds annually, and we reached that goal. It was amazing. Miles Ryder was a co-liaison, and then as he stepped off, Jeff Huckabee became co-liaison. And I think it's good to have just representatives from our board focused on a relationship with food bank, whether or not it needs to be a committee, but if there would be, I think, two people who would like to have that as a focus, it would be great. But I would be open to saying it should be a committee as well. I think our tradition has been, it's been a couple of people who are focused on that.
Back to the regenerative ag and climate combination, I think that sounds like a good idea, but what I think would be great to liaison a little bit more with the environmental science and advisory panel is beyond regenerative ag, like permaculture, polyculture, urban farming, carbon sink, microbial inoculations, innovation, and I'm very interested in the solution side of things and how do we rapidly scale up farming as a solution to the climate crisis as a carbon sink. And yeah, that I don't want to speak for Doria, but I think just your expertise too around beyond regenerative ag is a very loose term, and it'd be good to really define what it means, but go beyond that.
There it is. So when I think about this topic, I think a lot about some of the things that people were talking about, the struggles they have of trying to advocate for the larger powers that be to see farming as a climate solution. I feel like less than the need for specific technical advisors to advise us on what particular practices are the best ones and how to, kind of measure them, which is great, and it'd be great to have that support. I think this board could do the world some service by actually articulating and pushing forward why farmland is a climate solution. And I feel like that's missing. That's not happening. And that's why these things are not included in 33. There's a bunch of different reasons, or maybe we need to get at what you were talking about in terms of, defining the durable systems uses or whatever. And I feel like that could be the work of this committee, is that kind of thinking through that and relying on folks that have been doing this work and know the technical side of it, so that we can match up our thoughts and kind of almost marketing with the technical realities, right? So in my mind, that's it, because I feel like, yes, there's all these different techniques and everything, but what we need is to put them all into a package that then clearly articulates why farmland is a climate solution.
I agree, especially with the 2023 Farm Bill coming up. Maybe we could work on that together.
And I would like to add, coming from the academic world, that we can have all these definitions, but if we don't do anything to deliver them and educate people, they get stuck in someone's desk or bookshelf, and they never go anywhere. And I think that is probably the most important thing, that since I've been back in California, I keep hearing, the lack of continuity in the education process, and sometimes even going wider. I think in agriculture, people have been looking at generations of people doing agriculture, and sometimes we are not expanding to other people that have not done agriculture. I always put myself as an example, because I was not trained as someone in agriculture, and I switched to agriculture through my training, in my education. And I think that's so important. Why don't we have a program where we can go to a school and convince a kid that wants to be a marine biologist that they can do agriculture? And, there are all these options and strategies. Not every, student that deals with an animal needs to be a veterinarian. They can have a ranch or work in animal sciences in different ways. So I think, even for expanding the path to people in agriculture, we need to start at the very early age to expand that and instill all the possibilities. I have students that come to college and they don't know what they want to be. And like I said, they come stuck with their mindset on a specific career and they don't know all the possibilities. And we are losing students because they don't know. And that's kind of a shame, and I think it would be our responsibility to do that. So everything that we do have that educational, translational component and start as early as possible.
Please, Doria.
Comments. So one, I just wanted to make a comment about, getting unexpected people to enter into agriculture. Yeah. Just to say that, Urban Healthy Organization that I've been stewarding for the last 15 years. For 15 years, we've had 40 urban youth come in and learn how to grow food on our 7 different school and community gardens, small farms in Richmond. And many of them come out actually wanting to grow. But they have all of these different barriers, not just not having any money because they're urban kids, but also just barriers of not having connections to rural communities and having a lot of fear about moving around in those communities, being Black and brown people, and not coming from those spaces. So it's just like there's a lot to investigate there. And then I just wanted to make a different comment about food banks, and I really value emergency food access. And I find, as somebody who grew up in poverty and lives in a very poor community in California, I find that the conversion of emergency food access to food access is really disturbing. Like more and more people are using it as the main way to get food, and that we actually also additionally need to look into kind of resilient food access that doesn't depend on people being in absolute emergency, that provides, alternatives to market-driven, food distribution. And so I would like to bring that up. I know it's a big topic, but I just want to say that they can't only be sending people to the food bank lines.
Thank you. So we have a process. What is the process that you were suggesting, Josh, for the committees? They were to volunteer or to put your name,
So I think the first step is we need to determine which committees that we would like to move forward with.
Right.
And then once we have done that, I will send a note out to everyone and then just respond back if you would like to serve on one of those committees. And if you would like to serve as a member, if you would like to serve as chair of that committee. And then we can collect those responses and kind of share that information at the next meeting and then kind of formalize the committee.
would you like a straw poll today on committees, or would you like that done by email to you?
I think email makes it easier.
Okay. Josh, would you send out an email then to everyone here, but then those who aren't here as well?
Yes, of
with
course.
that, and then would you also just include, would you like to be the liaison or co-liaison to the food bank?
Yes. And so just to confirm, which committees are we comfortable moving forward with?
Well-
4? Is that?
Well, that was I had a question. Did we resolve the regenerative versus the environmental sciences committee versus the climate? Did we just
No, I don't-
mash them together, or
I
did
did
we
not get clarity on that. So that's what I
yeah.
was-
So
yes.
what do we want to do with that?
It's a good question. Glenn, I was wondering if that would be one of the answers that you would get if you'd like to have that as one committee or as 2 committees. And we could do a straw poll on that today, or we could give you that direction or indication on an email. Which would you prefer? Would you like to do a straw poll today? Regenerative and climate together, or regenerative and climate separately?
Could I ask a couple more questions?
Sure.
So the Ag Vision one is fairly short term, is it not? Because that is supposed to be completed fairly soon. I mean, because there's timing on these committees too.
So the Ag Vision will be completed, but I think, and will be finalized, but that committee will make sure that we're kind of moving forward and keeping those priorities, those strategic objectives.
So
at the
some
forefront.
oversight
Yeah,
and some
exactly.
communication and outreach. Okay, so it doesn't end. So Ag Vision would involve being engaged in the finaling of the report and then how it moves on out.
Yes.
Water, you brought up,
Yes.
would be looking at quantity, quality, conveyance, the whole shebang?
The
Is
whole
that what we're
shebang.
talking
Basically,
about?
water has continued to be, as you know, a significant issue in
issue.
agriculture, and
Drought.
the committee takes on a wide variety of those issues.
Use of reclaimed water, like Kenny was talking about today, which,
Yes. Yes.
often gets
It's
left out
mostly
of the
focused on a
discussion.
lot of
Okay.
drought situations and movement of water. I mean, that's been a lot of the challenges that we've had in the past. But I mean, I think that committee is dynamic enough to be able to respond. One of the challenges that we've had in the water sector from the administration standpoint is that actions may occur administratively that this board meeting once a month does not have the ability to respond quick enough to. So it allows the water committee to make a recommendation with board input to the board that we could then finalize.
And then last but not least is this question about the other 3 topics. Are they one or are they not?
And so I guess the concern that I think that we have here at CDFA is what I expressed in terms of we do have the Environmental Farming Science Act Advisory Panel, which primarily does advise on the climate smart agricultural programs, the suite of programs that we use here. And so I think they work on if they should be additional climate smart ag programs. They look on the metrics in terms of how those grant programs will work, what adjustments they need to move forward, and there's a lot of research and input that they go through in a process. So if we have a climate committee, what is there? Obviously, we should not have overlap between that. We don't want to have our board saying something. I mean, but I mean, maybe from a policy standpoint, I think, and maybe as Doria suggested, kind of pushing in a marketing sense in terms of the importance of agriculture and climate could be a good space for that committee. But I think just to understand that that's kind of the scope that we would focus on. And then regenerative would be the 4th. But I think there's a lot of also overlap between regenerative and climate. So I don't know. Does it make sense to group them as one?
But there's a difference
there's a
between
difference.
having review and oversight of programs,
Yes.
such as the Environmental Services Committee, versus a discussion on policy needs and
Policy,
communication.
legislation,
Exactly.
and marketing too.
Exactly.
Around like how regenerative ag's a solution, but then also what we saw today, that partnership between the cattle rancher and the wildlife, Fish and Wildlife Services, like scaling more things up like that are symbiotic, that might not fall into the definition of regenerative ag, but are still technically a solution.
I mean, I could see a committee that's regenerative and climate smart ag, which isn't oversighting the programs, but is talking policy
Yeah.
and bigger picture
Yeah.
and communications and all
Yeah.
that. I could see, I would suggest that.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me, too, to
Thank
have
you.
fewer committees rather than more. Just
Yeah,
because
because
I
there's
think,
not that many of us.
yeah, we have a limited number of members and limited bandwidth.
Well, if we could start with 3, and if that seemed like too much work to be as a combined regenerative and climate smart, it could always be separated out
So-
later.
And I think from an administrative standpoint, I would say that 5 members would constitute a committee. So if we go out and we do not get a response of 5 members to join those committees, well, I guess we'll revisit it at that next board meeting. But I mean, that's kind of the general thought. And then we'll nominate, I think Dawn will make nominate a chair to those committees based on those that have expressed interest.
Josh, you have direction then?
I have direction.
Very good, thank you. We at this time would take public comment from anybody that would like to give public comment to the Board of Food and Ag.
If you would like to make a public comment for items that are not on the agenda, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a really full day. You know, I was told when I sat down in this chair that jokes can't come from this table here. But I was going to just share a story that, you know, Josh and I were up in the mountains in the forest. Not too long ago, we were hiking, and we came into this meadow. It's a beautiful meadow, and we got out in the middle of that meadow, and there was a big hole. It was quite a big hole in the ground, bigger than we could see to the bottom. And Josh grabbed a rock and threw it in, and we listened. And, you know, it never hit the bottom. It didn't hit water either. This was before Sigma. But then I grabbed a bigger rock and threw it in, and it never hit the bottom. We sort of said, that was weird, wasn't it, Josh? And we saw a railroad tie sitting off on the side of the meadow, and we both decided it'd be good to throw that railroad tie into that hole. And we did. We pulled it over and threw it in, and we listened. And out from the trees came a goat, a huge goat. It had huge horns, and it was running like crazy. It took one big bounce and went down that hole. Wow, it was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. And pretty soon a farmer came out from the trees and asked us if we'd seen his goat. And we described this goat going down that hole. And he said, well, that's not my goat. My goat was tied to a railroad tie. And anyway, we got out of there pretty quick. It did remind me that, you know, we can sometimes see the same thing, but have a different perspective on what we're seeing. And it's good as a board to be working together and share common experience and share with one another what we've seen and make decisions that include all of our perspectives. Thank you very much for a good meeting today.
Well done. Thank you.
Record.